Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let us start our webinar. Good afternoon again. I'm welcoming everybody here on behalf of UNESCO Bureau in Almaty. We will start today our last in 2021 webinar dedicated to the development of capacity building of museum officers in Central Asian and Southern Caucasus countries. And in this series of webinars, the specialists from various regions of the world were sharing their experience on how to best organize the museum works. And all in all, we have already conducted 15 webinars. Today's webinar is number 16. The recordings of all previous webinars are available on our YouTube channel. And you will find the links in the chat where you will be able to find all the records. The majority of them are available both in Russian and English, and others where we had Russian-speaking presenters or speakers. Their presentations are available only in Russian. Today, we will be talking about the concept of museums and how it was resorted over and how it was transformed. And today it will be presented by our guest speaker, Ms. Hiroko Tsuboi-Friedman, who's got a lot of various honorable awards. She is Deputy Director on International Issues of the Secretariat on Scientific Council of Japan. She is also a co-founder of Culture of Nippon, which is providing a platform which is uniting all stakeholders who are supporting culture and arts. In addition, she is a member of the board in Kanagawa Prefecture, and she is the member of ICOM Council. And last week, she was also making a presentation, and at that time, she was talking about the development of creative industries, and it was in the framework of a different series of webinars. And today we will specifically be talking about the museums and how the concept was transformed and evolving in her country. Therefore, Ms. Hiroko, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for participation.
Thank you, Mr. Masanov, for your kind presentation, and thank you very much for giving me the floor. I'd like to share my screen first now, so let me try.
Now we can see the screen.
Can you see my notes as well? How's this?
No. We don't see the notes.
So is this okay?
Yes, perfect.
Great. Okay, so thank you very much once again, and good afternoon and salametsuya, konnichiwa. I think good afternoon to all. First, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to the organizer of this webinar, the UNESCO Almaty office. Thank you very much, to all who have come to join this webinar today. I thank you also for those who attended the last week webinar on the cultural and creative industry session. Once again, my name is Hiroko Tsuboi-Friedman. I'm a member of the expat facility of the UNESCO 2005 Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expression. As I kindly introduced, I'm also a Deputy Director for International Affairs, Science Council of Japan, Secretariat, Japanese Government Cabinet Office. I also serve as a board member for local municipality council and organizations relating to promoting of arts and culture. Just a little bit of my academic background too. My academic disciplines are art history, sociology, and cultural anthropology. My earlier research interest was about how objects, in particular, what was called arts and crafts, have traveled and entered into the museums and art market. And then later on, my scope of interest had widened into the relationship between museum and society. And today I am talking as 2005 Convention expat facility member in my own individual capacity. So today's topic, what is a museum? ICOM in Japan, I stated. I just suggest to think about this question: what is museum? What it is for us, and what it is. And touching on the ongoing process and discussions in the International Council of Museums, ICOM in shortage, and ICOM Japan committee, which I belong to also. I would like to focus on these three aspects: refining museum, policy development, and culture talk. And by the way, the photo is from the lobby area of the Museum of Natural History of Kanagawa Prefecture. I live. So refining museums, the redefinition of museums. I would like to take you back to 2019. So Kyoto, Japan, to the world of pre-COVID-19 now. So the 25th General Conference of International Council of Museums, ICOM Kyoto, was held in September. I assume that many of you here today are museum professionals, but in case for those who are not familiar with the International Council of Museums, ICOM, it's an international organization of museums and museum professionals, which is committed to the research, conservation, continuation, and communication to society of the world's natural and cultural heritage, present and future, and tangible and intangible. ICOM is a membership association and is a non-governmental organization which establishes professional and ethical standards for museum activities. It was created in 1946, and now it has 45,000 professionals in over 138 countries with 118 national committees and 32 international committees. And ICOM is the only global organization in the museum field. Although there are some others as well, for something like art museums and so forth. But a museum as a whole is the only global organization. ICOM maintains a formal relationship with the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, and has a consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council. So that now the definition of museums, in the ICOM statute, was long reviewed by what's called MDPP, the Standing Committee on Museum Definition, Prospects, and Potentials, which was established in 2017. The following new definition was proposed and supposed to be adopted at the ICOM Kyoto in September 2019. Right now, the current definition goes like this. It was the ICOM statute adopted by the 22nd General Assembly in Vienna, Austria, in 2007. So it is as you can see. And in Japan, by the way, the Museum Act was enacted in 1951, well, in 52. And although there is a unique system of registered museums, the role of museum is mainly, generally in line with this ICOM definition. In countries do not have museums law, or anything concerned, the ICOM definition is often referred to. So the ICOM definition of museum is over quite a great significance. At the ICOM Kyoto, the September 3rd plenary session, there was a session called Rethinking of the ICOM Museum Definition. The MDPP, the chairperson as a moderator, and the presentation by 6 people from both inside and outside of the MDPP stressed the challenging environmental change, such as the limits of the dualistic world rooted in the Western world, the imbalance of wealth and poverty, and the earth crisis, such as climate change, and the importance of museum as a place for dialogues. The conversation just kept going on all over the places, in and outside of the sessions, throughout the conference. And I can just remind you, that the UNESCO in 2015 put out the recommendation concerning the protection and promotion of the museums and collections. It recognized that the museums as a spaces for cultural transmission, intercultural dialogue, learning, discussion, and training, and also play an important role in education, formal, informal, and lifelong learning, and social cohesion and sustainable development. So now, the new alternative definition proposed. In July 2019, prior to the ICOM Kyoto, ICOM announced this alternative museum definition. That was to be subject to be a vote. And aside from the minor changes, ICOM's definition of museum for around 50 years has been a non-profit institution, as you saw previously, like in India, in the screen. A non-profit institution that acquires, conserves, researches, communicates, and exhibits the tangible and intangible heritage of humanity and its environment for the purposes of education, study, and enjoyment. So the new statement was supposed to be adopted in Kyoto, changing the definition to, as you can see on the first line, democratizing, inclusive, polyphonic space for critical dialogue about the past and the future. So now the countries, such as France, spoke of it as being ideological text, and so forth. There were quite many debates around it, as you can imagine. On the last day of the conference, after long and divisive debate, the 25th General Assembly of the International Council of Museums, ICOM, decided to postpone a vote on a new definition for museums. Now, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what actually happened, what I observed from the floor there. The country, as I mentioned, France and started off by calling basically the postponement, calling the new proposed definition being too ideological, and also mentioned that without the consultation of the national committees and along with other national branches and international committees of ICOM, they also started to request the postponement. The proposed new definition was strongly supported by countries such as the USA, Australia, and Denmark. But the concerned voices from the floor at the General Assembly were on the lack of consultations and respectful procedures, as well as widely criticized wordings rather than the ethical values behind the new definition. Also, many members have argued that the proposed definition reflected what museums are already doing and what museums need to do to be relevant now and in the future. In particular, something like the ICOM Burkina Faso was concerned about adapting the pros and cons of the definition on the floor there, would show to the world that the ICOM itself is being divided. Or some members have, have mentioned the pragmatic reasons, for opposing the new definitions. For instance, in some countries, especially in which the ICOM definition is embedded in the national legislation, the members expressed a concern about how the government will react to the proposed definition. About the too ideological, dimension of it. They argued that the politicians and the policy makers simply may not be able to understand, or concern was an overly broad definition, straying too far from the commonly understood museum functions, could result in government funding scheme change. Also about the language issue too, with the English version, many argues that the definition sounded more like a mission statement or the political manifesto. there were some striking moments, like also from, like, from various aspects too. I'm just recalling, like, the ICOM Iran asked for the postponement, and it was followed by the ICOM Israel. And, like, they said for the first time, Iran and Israel were able to agree. The Israeli member argues that, like, for some countries, that, ICOM definition, like, it is legally binding. And in the regions where historical, like, heritage is in danger of being destroyed due to ethnic conflicts, like, for instance, the first requirement for this, definition is, and, like, should be, like, to provide a basis for protecting the heritage, tangible in particular. So the vote was done, about the postponement. The new definition, is to be voted during the ICOM Prague 2022, whose title is now The Power of Museums. The statement, by, at the time president, Mrs. Swai-Aksoy, said, this was, one of the most democratic processes in the history of ICOM. So now, new committee, the ICOM defined, was established after MDPP. So it is an initiative, to promote democratic and transparent discussions. So in order to promote this, the democratic and transparent debate, ICOM has been working for 18 months towards the adoption of a new definition at the ICOM Prague congregation scheduled for August 22. The 11 steps, and 4 rounds of consultations are to be carried out over the period of 18 months in preparation for the adoption of the new definition of the ICOM Prague. So let's see. So you can see, the methodology here. The timeline started in December 2020 and end in May 2022. The transparency of the process is better considered in this case. And they really try to exchange views, with all ICOM members at all stages, and ICOM members are to be consulted at all stages on the process. All materials related to the process will be made available and is on the member page of the ICOM website. And right now, you can see 1 through 12, we are at the stage, step 6 and 7 at the moment. 6, step 6, consultations 3, evaluation of keywords and concepts. And then step 7, the data analysis of consultation. So we are preparing for the ICOM defined drafting on proposals 8, the step 8 at the moment. Back in June, on June 22nd, a report on the ICOM member feedback for the new museum definition came out, and it was analyzed and presented by the ICOM Define Committee. So this is the outcome after the step 4 and step 5, of the second consultation of the 11 steps and 4 consultations. They are, the step 4, the quantitative and the qualitative analysis of consultation carried out between April to June. And then step 5, preparations and presentation of conclusion from the consultation 2. So here we can see the structure of respondents. There are national committees, international committees, regional alliances, and affiliated organizations. And you can see the breakdowns too. And now this is by region. And it is unfortunately still overwhelmingly European based. Now, of course, the argument always is the museum is and can be said to be a device that symbolizes the dominance in terms of culture. Most of the museums from non-Western countries they were participating in those global museum policy talks or the museums that were created during the colonial occupations. And for Japan too, like I say, like, the idea of museum was an important one from the West. At the late 19th century, like, it was the government policy to import, like, first and foremost, like, for quote unquote modernization. So looking closer into the region, like, this breakdown, like, of regions, clearly, like, the non-European regions are underrepresented, which actually is a concern, of course. Asia Pacific, like, our region involvement is only 10 countries, and there is no countries like of Central Asia and the Caucasus. There are 48 members, like, parties, like, member parties of the UNESCO in the region. The Asia Pacific region, of course, like, accounts for almost 2/3 of the world population, and gathers, and countries that are of great diversity in economic, religious, political, and cultural terms. So, but this museum talk is actually very important to get involved, and to move together. Coming back to the report, by the ICOM define, the global consultation results, show top terms mentioned here now. So what is going on now? The members, all the members, were asked and compiled a maximum 20 keywords or concepts, ideas, words, and phrases, and submitted to their affiliations, such as national committees and international committees directly. And so this was the result. You can see the terms in the bottom, starting from the left, research, all the way to the right is permanent, and the percentages voted or submitted. And these are the other terms like mentioned from the previous graphs, from enjoyment, entertainment, and all the way down to social 8%. And it's a small, excuse me, but these are also other terms. Active, these numbers are is 7%, and all the way down to good 1%. And the total terms identified 127 words, terms. So this is going to be this is going with reasonably reasonable attention on transparency and at the much tried democratic processes. But who's making up the ICOM community? They have to that shouldn't be the topic. Who has the voting rights and who is talking about museum? Here, so. Only the national and the international committees or the people who have access to those, are the ones getting involved in this at the moment. And this is actually the profile of the ICOM membership at the moment. According to this is compiled by the ICOM Japan committee. For our fiscal General Assembly. So the figures might be different from the headquarters. But you can see that the regional imbalance is still very huge, and as well as the number of individual membership. You can see, versus organizing, individual versus organization membership. So ICOM needs to discuss not only the new definition of museum, but also I suggest the equality and representation of delegates, of the members. And this is a breakdown here too, for the ICOM Japan. This is the member structure, for Japan, committee. The individual membership counts the larger part, just like in the global one, the larger parts, and it's supposed it's function, financially also, so. So what have Japan, ICOM Japan have, the committee submitted and the process of this submission now, coming back to the redefinition process. The ICOM Japan conducted an online survey in February. The official language of ICOM, by the way, are English, French, and Spanish. And the nuance of Japanese language differ from person to person, and of course, far from those official languages of ICOM. It was decided to solicit proposals in English. So as a result, more than 100 comments were received, and then some selected members of ICOM Japan committees chose 50 keywords. Again, members were asked to compile a survey by 4 scales later on, from very important, important, somewhat important, not important, among those 50 keywords. Then, an online open forum was held on March 27th with those selected group members as panelists, and more than 60 people participated in the forum. Now, they were majorly ICOM members. There are only handful of non-ICOM members. And what you see here, on the left, from accessibility, to sustainability, those are the ones that were majorly decided before this open forum. And during the open forum, those terms from cultural hub down to equity, and framed in red, were added by through the discussion at the forum. So coming back to to the ICOM report, between the global ICOM Japan, the global reports and ICOM Japan consultation to there were about 70% matches in words and concepts, the terms, with what ICOM Japan submitted. Those are I say research from the left, conservation and preservation, heritage, education and didactic, inclusive, collection, display/exhibit, sustainability, accessibility, culture/cultural, diversity, communication, dialogue. They were the matches that I wrote. So 70%. But what is museum in Japan then? And what does museum mean in Japanese? And there are several expressions that we use. Here, on the right, I just took the picture. And on the one on the left is pronounced museum or museum in Japanese, using characters called katakana, Japanese writing form, developed in the 9th century, which is often used for foreign words and expressions. And then on the right, it's called hakubutsukan. Hakubutsukan. It was derived from what we call in kanji, in a writing form imported from China in late 4th century, excuse me. And the nuances are slightly different, even in Japanese format, those writings, museums on the left and hakubutsukan on the right. But they both mean vaguely together the same thing, what we call in English museum. And according to the ICOM Japan committee, the factors to be considered for the selection of the for the the 20 keywords, key terms, for redefining process were: number 1, ICOM Kyoto 2019, the 3rd General Conference held in Asia, and the Museum Act, this was passed as law in 1952, and then later on amended in 2008. That's another big debate that was going in parallel. So So what was really ICOM Kyoto, 2019, what was it about? We can see by figures here, the subtitle was museums as cultural hubs, one of the key terms, the terms, that ICOM Japan wanted to submit it, for, among the 20 key terms, the cultural hubs, anyways, the museums as a cultural hubs, the future of tradition, was a subtitle, of the, of the ICOM Kyoto. And this was a record-breaking audience of 4,590 participants from 120 countries and territories gathered in Kyoto, and to tackle the wide variety of issues under the umbrella of sustainable development, from decolonization to restitution to cultural diversity, from disaster risk management to local development. In ICOM Kyoto, one of the 5 resolutions, by the way, adopted, was about Asia, commitment to the integration of Asia into the ICOM community. And it was adopted, over 91% voting in favor. So now, shifting, to, Japan and the museum law, the Museum Act in Japan. It reads like this at the moment. It stipulates that the museums are organizations with the purpose of collecting and preserving, including nurturing, materials related to history, arts, folk customs, industry, natural science, etc., exhibiting them, providing them for use by the general public on the basis of educational considerations, conducting necessary work in order to contribute to education, research, recreation, etc. And in addition, undertaking surveys and research relating to these materials. The museums in Japan can be classified in various ways, such as by type of museums, by founder and by legal status. But broadly speaking, there are general museums, museums with both humanities and natural science sections, history museums, including archaeology and folklore, etc., art museums, science museums, including science halls and planetariums, and then zoos, botanical gardens, aquariums, and so on. According to, to the 2018 Social Education Survey of the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology, next we call, there are a total of 5,738 museums in Japan. By types of museum, the breakdown is 3,328 history museums, the highest in number, followed in order by 1,069 art museums and 454 science museums. But the number have changed under the pandemic. I'm not going to talk about the, the impacts of the pandemic today, unfortunately. And at the peak, back about 20 some years ago, there were more than 6,000, close to 7,000 museums, by the way. And the reason why I mentioned about social education in Japan, the legal framework and of and around the Museum Act looks like this basically. The Museum Act is the law positioned in the education legal system. And the current education law system is derived from the Constitution of Japan. So the structure of the Museum Act in the system look like this. There's the Constitution of Japan around, and then the basic education law, and then the social education law, and then the museum law. So the 2 pillars of the Museum Act are curators and the registration system, which I will talk about. But this format, this framework, the structure is reminiscence of why the museum, the idea, the concept of museum was the imported one from the West, like, through the process of modernizations, like back in 19th century. And even to this day, like, by the way, the Agency for Cultural Affairs, like, is the part of the Ministry of Education, and it's which is very, like, basically, like, education, like, based, like, or like education, like, centered, so the cultural, like, the policy is, slightly, like, in a different direction, although they are on, like, in the same, like, structure. And by the way, there's no Ministry of Culture. So the idea of museum was imported from the West in the 15th century, like, and the current Museum Act after years is clearly not fitting the current situation in Japan. I'm sorry, like, I have a cat on my lap now. Current Museum Act, like, after years, is clearly, like, not fitting the current one, like, or the current situation at the moment in Japan, like, and of course, like, with international trends and discourses about museums. In August 2020, like, the Science Council of Japan, which I work with, like, issued a recommendation, like, further recommendations, like, for revision of the Museum Act based upon the recommendations of, like, of the 2017. But, like, like, you can see, like, the formation. The latest recommendation, like, was put together last year, like, after the ICOM Kyoto, like, in August, like, they came out, like, with this, like, with the key members, like, who are also, like, part of the ICOM, like, Kyoto. It states the structure, like, inadequacies, like, of the registered museum system and curatorial qualification stipulated, like, in the Museum, like, Act, like, or, like, 1952. Like, it wasn't drastically revised, like, in 2008. So the gap of, with reality is still remarkably huge. So the recommendation, like, says, like, it's necessary to establish a new certification system that is consistent with the law for the protection of cultural properties, and the system, like, that recognizes curators as researchers, like, instead of the conventional reservation systems. Like, they have to do everything pretty much. So this report was prepared against the background of the 2017 recommendation, like, what museums and art galleries should be in the 21st century towards the revision of the museum law and ICOM Kyoto. Did I skip that? Sorry. Yeah, so these, like, these are, like, there's some of the advices, like, and the recommendations, like, you can see, like, from 1 through 5, through 5, shift from the registered museum system to certified, like, number 2, like, like, establishing, like, a third-party organization, like, to monitor, like, 3, revision of the curatorial system, like, to establish category of curators, design a new system of, to enable, curators to conduct original research, and creation of Ministry of Culture to improve the operations and strengthen the functions of museums. Like, this the passion, like, and desire, like, the voice, like, for creation of Ministry of Culture, like, has been increased, especially, like, under the pandemic also. So now, like, talking about, like, the museum, like, from a little bit bigger perspective, like, like, in the Japanese cultural policy, like, the museum law, like, in the framework of social education, but of course, like, it goes side by side, like, with cultural policy too at this point. The basic act on promotion of culture and the arts, like, was enacted in 2001. And a partial revision, like, of the basic act on the promotion of culture and the arts came out, like, in 2017. And the basic plan on the promotion of culture and the arts, like, was, like, followed a year later in 2018. And the reason and aims were the rapid social changes, including declining birth rates and aging society and globalization, call for further measures to create a comprehensive culture and arts policy that promotes collaboration among a diverse range of relevant fields, including tourism, local development, and international exchanges, etc. Also, another mentioning point is that the upcoming 2020 Tokyo Olympic and Paralympic Games, it was regarded as both a sports and a cultural festival, of course, and it was a significant opportunity for Japan to disseminate its culture and arts to the international community, and a chance for a nation to demonstrate creating new values through culture and arts. That's what the Japanese government aimed for. So to implement, those, the basic plan on the promotion, of culture and the arts, was enacted in 2018. And so this is just a guideline, of what it looks like. The Japanese culture, Japanese government's notion, of arts and culture. Actually, we can read, the culture and arts, brings sensation and the joy of living to us, and enrich our lives. The arts are, at the same time, a strong driving force in revitalizing society at large. Arts and culture play a vital role in our lives. End close. And these are some of the, the key, the points, that was outlined in the basic plan. And this also, but just talking about, the Tokyo Olympic 2020, which was actually, just this summer, it was campaigned as the biggest booster for stagnant Japanese economy, and the culture and the museums were, and are, in the scope. But what was going on, before the Tokyo Olympics, with the the basic plan, which I just mentioned, there were also two the legal framework that was put out together. One was Ainu Policy Promotion Act of 2019, and also the Cultural Tourism Promotion Act in 2020. Now, the Ainu the policy promotion, the Ainu people, are the indigenous people who live in around the northern part of the Japanese archipelago, especially in the northern Hokkaido area, the northern the island, and have their own language, religion, and culture. But since the invasion, by Japanese, and assimilation policy, they have been neglected and discriminated, and were not recognized as indigenous people. Diversity is actually a serious issue in Japan, and even to this day. The UN, in the Human Rights Committee, recommended that the Japanese government officially recognize as the Ainu people and Ryukyu people, Ryukyu are the ones in the southern islands, as indigenous peoples in domestic legislation, and take measures to promote the protection of their cultural heritage and traditional ways of life. It is also recommended that the sufficient opportunities should be given to the children of Ainu and Ryukyu peoples to acquire the language and culture of their peoples, and that education on Ainu and Ryukyu Okinawa culture and history should be introduced into regular education. So with the aim of realizing society in which the pride of Ainu people as respected and their status is enhanced, this organization promotes the promotion of Ainu culture and dissemination, enlightenment of knowledge about Ainu traditions and measures to improve the lives of Ainu people. And of course, around that time, I just mentioned that back in 1899 in Japan, there was what's called Hokkaido Indigenous People Protection Act, which was very discriminatory, the legal framework, by the way. But here it says indigenous people in English translation, by the way. And then 1997 was Ainu Cultural Promotion Act. And then, internationally, the 2007 was UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And in 2020, the Japanese, the government added, this Ainu Policy Promotion Act, excuse me, 2019. So although the Japanese government signed 2007 UN declaration, it did so on the condition that the rights of the group, such as indigenous rights as referred to in the declaration, to be denied in Japan domestically. This is because the Japanese government's official position is that the Ainu no longer have group, have a group that should be subject to the indigenous rights, so it's a very complex issue to this day. So with this new act, the Ainu Policy Promotion Act, there are people of, with Ainu roots, saying that the government is trying to turn the Ainu into the indigenous people for its own interest. The government is trying to turn the modern Ainu into, quote, indigenous people for its own interest, and we cannot hope to pass on our culture in healthy ways. So that's one. The the Tourism Promotion Act is the law concerning the promotion of cultural tourism in regions with cultural tourism hub facilities at the core. So the purpose of this act is to link the promotion of culture to the promotion of tourism, economic activity, and the revitalization of local communities to create a good cycle in which the economic effects such promotion can be reinvested in the promotion of culture to make it a healthy circle. But what is it really for? And for food, that's always the question. While working on the statements this summer, of these things, much controversial Olympic, was like this. You can see the demonstrations on the streets in center of Tokyo. The ICOM claims that it's a not-for-profit independent international organization that is committed to building a better world, better world through sport. And the Tokyo 2020 Olympics was supposed to be the showcase to display what Japan is proud of, what Japan is good for, good at, but at the same time, with the pandemic, it was like X-raying the country, to show the various challenges, which were hidden until now. So just like this, so before, right before the game, the polls showed that 55 respondents, said they were opposed to the Olympics. So I just wanted to mention that how the cultural rights and the rights for culture is is an important key concept when we think about the museum in the scheme of cultural talk. Just this is from the Japanese Constitution, but the Japanese Constitution actually touched about the culture very slightly, but surely here, which came out into effect in 1947, excuse me, immediately after the World War II. The drafting of this was done during the U.S. occupation. Excuse me. And Article 25 here, it says the culture living, the interpretation of this phrase has been the debate, in relationship to cultural rights. And by the way, of course, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came out the year later, in 1948. Article 27 is right to cultural, artistic, and scientific life. Everyone has the right to freely to participate in the cultural life of community, to enjoy the arts and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. So I just wanted to make sure, make sure to touch upon, the UNESCO 2005 Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions, because we are also talking about the culture and the museums that in the scope of the creative industry, the creative economy, cultural and creative industries, the CCIs. The global discussion on the creative economy, found momentum in 1990s when the globalization pressures spurred mainly on the defensive approaches, within the landscape of the global market, shifting. The commodification of culture, and free trade, talk and everything. So there are here some key ideas that I just listed out of this particular convention. What it affects and also impacts and relate to the national branding, built in the monitoring framework for cultural policies, promotion of the growth of culture and arts, stimulates and supports the culture and creative sectors, blah blah blah, and also about building cohesive society, link with the national brandings, and or participation and contribution to the global framework making, of the cultural policy and so forth. So just very quick run through the formation of this cultural policy talks and dialogues, with the UNESCO 2005 convention here. I listed from 1972, the World Heritage, all the way down to 2005 Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. And of course, later on, there's a recommendation, on the museum, which I mentioned earlier, which was in 2015. So there is the lineage of development that we can see here. And this is just the pamphlet of the UNESCO investing in creativity, which is not yet in Russian. I do strongly hope there will be one soon. I just translated the one into Japanese, and now it's out on the web page as well. But it's a very comprehensive one, and something that we all, the museum professionals also have to be aware of, I think. It talks about the creative and the culture and creative industries, and the impact and how the convention is built around, and what is is good for some of the factors. Right now, there are 19 parties of the convention that can join the conventions in the Asia Pacific region, and Turkmenistan is 149, and Uzbekistan is 146. These intergovernmental and the periodic reports, and that's another monitoring framework, which is crucial also. So I think I'll skip because of the time strain, I believe. So when we it's coming to an end. I'm sorry for speaking too much, maybe. But when we talk about the museum, of course, we are talking about the structure or hierarchies, also so I just said art or culture or creativities, and just to talk about the culture, it is like opening a Pandora box. And we, we mentioned, with the convention, with international frameworks, with domestic and cultural policies too, we majorly talk about the benefits and the positive aspects of culture, and the benefits, of investment. And there are various concerns and different perspectives and discourses also against this type of discourses of culture. Or the current trend of attitude towards the culture. I just wanted to mention, just different perspectives. You know, like, here's just one example, like, from back in 1968, the French artist, Jean Dubuffet, of the art brut, for Mana, talking about that, this is quite in the past, in order to exonerate themselves, the corrupt and the powerful built museums instead of monasteries, as a power, as a power message. It's just a quote, where it came from, it's the suffocating atmosphere in the Asian culture. So we have to be quite careful, when we're talking about the culture, and also museum too, in various ways, but also just have to be alarmed, and have to be aware of the various discourses and perspectives, and who is talking, who's involved in this culture or the museum talk. And this is just one last topic. I think I talked about this too, last week, but I'll end this my talk with one anecdote. The news came out just a few days ago at this point, last week, but it's about the Japanese wolf. And the last Japanese wolf was captured in a mountain, in the western part, in 1905 by a hunter. He was beaten to death. An Englishman bought it and sent it back to England. So now the specimen is now preserved in the British Museum, and there are only 4 preserved in the museum globally. And in the past, the wolves actually were seen and treated as god, deities, in Japan. There were even shrines dedicated to wolves. However, in the Meiji era, in the same time, the concept of museum was imported into Japan, in the late 19th century. This whole idea, about the wolves, being, the higher being, the holy being, was evil, was eliminated. Now, the wolves were evil. That notion was imported, brought into Japan, along with the Western civilizations and culture. So until then, there was no stock farming, custom or culture in Japan. And when it's, so with the modernization, the images, in stories like Little Red Riding Hood, or the wolf, with 7 goats, little goats, came in, so wolves are evil now. So they have to be exterminated. So they're all gone now. So I'll leave you with this little story anecdote. So thank you very much for your attention. Большое спасибо, наконец.
Большое спасибо, госпожа Хироко.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Hiroko.
Большое спасибо.
Thanks a lot. So the screen demonstration is over. I would like again to thank our speaker and the participants. We've got a little bit of time to ask questions that you can ask in the chat, to which all speakers and I have access. Meanwhile, I would like to tell you that, as usual, all the presentations will be distributed to our participants, to our listeners, and you will be able to receive them in your email boxes. And I would like to take a chance and request Ms. Hiroko to send your presentation to us, whereas all the videos will be available in our YouTube channels. As I announced it before, I do not see any questions in the chat meanwhile, but I think that Igor Halapova from UNESCO Bureau Almaty has some questions. Yes, thank you very much, Majer. Thank you very much, Hiroko. It was really very interesting to listen to your presentation. And you mentioned that you have about 7,000 museums in Japan, but at the same time, you said that there is no Ministry of Culture in Japan. Could you please tell us a little bit more about funding of the state museums?
Thank you, Igo, for the question. Yes, it's a very complex situation at the moment, because as I said, like, the concept of museum was the important one, and it was for the social education purpose. And therefore, like, it was under the ministry, the Ministry of Education, like, which actually is also like responsible for culture. Unfortunately, now, the museum discourse has developed also in Japan, and it has changed, so much, and it's not just in the scheme of the social education. Of course, it have to be very well, should be under the ministry, of the agencies such as the Ministry of Culture. So that's why there should be there's a whole debate going on to have the Ministry of Culture being established, but it hasn't been finalized or realized yet. The funding, most of the funding for the national museums are of course coming from the government, and it is through the Ministry of Education to make it make it to short the next the Ministry of Education. But there's this the registration the system at the moment is making it very complicated and difficult for this type of funding, because there are museums who claim to be museums and then registered, and there are national museums who cannot claim as museums because they are the social educational institutions. So the concept of division is so wide. Although they do have the money, it's not mainly the money issue, but the structural issues within the government. Am I answering the question?
Thank you very much, Ms. Hiroko. I would like to seek a small clarification in case if funding of the museum is provided by the government. Does it mean that the museum will have to request for money for certain programs, and the funds are provided as grants, or the museums are free to decide what they're going to spend this money on the, let's say, the renovation of the museums or construction?
May I answer now? Okay.
Yes, sure.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yes, there are the public, or the national and the public museums, and also there are private museums, and mostly in Japan, most of the museums, especially the art museums, actually, which actually grew so much in numbers, to over 1,000, are actually public museums. And so, they didn't even in the pandemic, they didn't have to worry about the funding, the financial situations. Of course, in the private, most of the other, the private, museums, they were severely hit, and they are actually receiving, the government, support, and at the moment, and many of them, doing some cloud fundings, and some other independent, the funding sources, of their own too, that's, it can be freely done. So it's it's a very, in a way, a unique, situation at the moment. There were many, museums were built, from 1960s on, and then peaked, in early 2000s, late, 1990s, to about 6 to 7,000, and then started to decline, and solidifies, as well. At the time, the the local municipalities were encouraged, to build museums, as as the display basically, of their cultural levels almost, or to show the cultural assets, of the of the places, so as a part of the local development scheme, and then now it's really gradually changing now. So it's going to be a very interesting time to see with the the redefinition of museum, to and also the redefining the museum law in Japan as well, actually, because the definition of museum changes really would impact the Japanese law as well, so we'll see what happens with it.
Большое спасибо.
Thank you very much. Since there are no other questions in the chat, and I see that Aygul Halafova would like to ask one more question. Yes, thank you, Chair. Hiroko, could you please tell us, for example, in Kazakhstan, we have the museums and the museums which are like reserves, which are in charge of ICH, and they are supported and they are funded by the Ministry of Culture. And what about the situation in Japan? Are the museums in charge of such objects of ICH? And if not, then who is taking care of your ICH objects?
Thank you, Aygul. They are actually done by by the government. In particular, the museum, the Ministry of Education. Now, the museum, the Ministry of Education holds the Agency for Cultural Affairs. All the cultural matters, including the cultural heritage, is done by the Agency for Cultural Affairs, which is a part of the Ministry of Education. So you can see the Ministry of Education, and underneath is the Agency for Cultural Affairs, which is small, but is there. And the debate at the moment is making this Agency for Cultural Affairs to a ministry level at the moment, so that we can have better, the management, of the cultural issues, including, those cultural assets and heritages, and also the museum things as well, but, they're all intertwined, right now, like this, and then this, hopefully, but we'll see what happens. Thank you.
Okay, clear, I've got it. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Ms. Hiroko. So we've got convinced that probably we will not be able to get rid of the ministries, even in Japan, where you don't have ministries. Nevertheless, you are driving to a conclusion that it will be much better to construct your relationship with the government authorities through ministries, because the ministry is an adequate platform for the museum activities. Okay, since I don't see any other questions in the chat, probably we will wind up our session. We will finalize our today's meeting a little bit sooner, and I would like to take a chance and thank our today's speaker, Ms. Hiroko Tsuboi-Friedman, for today's presentation and for the presentation of last week. And I would also like to thank everybody who was participating in the organization of webinars for museum officers, our simultaneous interpreters, as well as our translators who were translating the presentations, our technical support team, as well as ICOM Secretariat, who advised us many good names among the experts on culture. And I hope that even if you missed one of the some of the webinars, you will be able to find them on our website. All the useful information is always available in our YouTube channel. And as to the concrete plans on the continuation of the webinars for museum workers, we don't have any concrete plans, but there will be some other programs for UNESCO for the next year. Therefore, we will be able to update you a little bit later on this. Thank you very much indeed to everybody, and we'll keep in touch. All the best.
Thank you very much. Please stay safe.
Thank you, Hiroka. Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.